On this episode of the Metal Command podcast, I talk about the passing of a legend, one of the most iconic frontmen of all time, the Prince of Darkness, Ozzy Osbourne. Easily one of the most influential people in the history of this music, Ozzy Osbourne, and of course the rest of Black Sabbath, laid the foundation for this awesome music that we love called heavy metal. And to this day, I have never once heard any singer in this genre of music sound anything like Ozzy. All of that coming up next on the Metal Command podcast.
You are listening to the Metal Command podcast.
Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of the Metal Command podcast. Tony here with you. Really excited, of course, to see everybody today. And if you do want to support the show, please hit the subscribe button and hit that little bell to be notified anytime I do post any kind of content. And of course, if you follow the show on any other form of social media, please give the show a like and a follow there. Before I get into what I'm about to talk about, I would love to hear from all of you in the comments. What was the first album you ever bought with Ozzy singing on it? And what is your favorite album he ever sang on? Or what is your favorite Black Sabbath album that he sang on in your favorite solo album? For me, the first album I ever bought that Ozzy sang on was the Randy Rhoads tribute album, the live album. My favorite Black Sabbath album with him singing is Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Favorite solo album, it's really difficult to pick, but I'm going to go with the first of his solo albums, like actual studio albums that I bought. That would be No More Tears. I would love to hear from you if you've ever met the man, your experiences with him, how you ended up getting into his music, whatever memory of Ozzy you want to leave in the comments. I would love to read that. Because I got to be honest, folks, I have never seen a frontman in all of heavy metal that was really as well revered and loved by more fans than Ozzy. And the thing is, people outside of the heavy metal genre, people that don't normally listen to this music, loved a lot of the songs that he wrote, helped write, and really liked a lot of his music, a lot of the music that he sang on. And you can't say that about a lot of metal bands in general. I think Metallica might be the only one where people kind of outside of heavy metal really like their stuff. But Ozzy was, the guy was special, folks. To a lot of people. Pretty much all of us grew up listening to music that he was singing on. Let's take a look at Black Sabbath, folks. I want everybody to think about this in a historical sense and realize just how important Black Sabbath and their legacy actually is to this music. Because Ozzy was one of 4 guys in a band named Black Sabbath that laid the foundation to inspire the creation of an entire genre of music. Think about that. Tony Iommi, Ozzy Osbourne, Geezer Butler, Bill Ward. That classic Black Sabbath lineup laid the foundation for an entire genre of music. Whether you like that era of Black Sabbath or not, or like that lineup or like those albums, folks, those are the most influential albums on this music ever. There are other bands that have obviously had a large influence on it, but Black Sabbath laid the foundation for all of it. And if you aren't into Black Sabbath's music, chances are the bands that inspire you or influence you or that you love that play heavy metal music I would say all or most of them were inspired by Black Sabbath. And the ones that weren't, the bands they were inspired by were probably influenced by Black Sabbath. That is how important Ozzy Osbourne and even the other guys in Black Sabbath, that original Black Sabbath lineup, are to this genre of music. And then after Ozzy left the band, after he was out of the band, he became an icon in his solo band. And one of the things that he did in his solo band, and one of the things that really influenced so many people, is the fact that the man was always surrounded by world-class musicians who themselves became highly influential to a lot of people, especially guitar players. Randy Rhoads. Folks, Randy Rhoads changed the way a lot of people played guitar. Jake E. Lee. Pretty highly influential on a lot of guitar players out there. Zakk Wylde. Pretty highly influential on a lot of guitar players. I would probably say Randy probably had the most influence out of those guys. But needless to say, those three guys alone influenced a lot of guitar players out there. And Ozzy has had a plethora of phenomenal musicians in his band. You know, he had a former bass player join Metallica. He had Gus G playing guitar in his band, Gus G from Firewind. He always had a great drummer. I can keep going on and on. However, the man was an icon in this genre of music. And I would say probably the most popular frontman in the history of heavy metal. You know, like, he was well revered by most of his contemporaries. When you look at, say, for example, a guy like Rob Halford paying tribute to Black Sabbath, singing some of their songs live. When you see a lot of these iconic bands that were influenced by him. Look at Metallica. Look at all the bands that played that festival. Think about that. Look at all of the people that played that festival. I'm not a fan of every one of those bands that played, not festival, but played that last show, right? You had Steven Tyler up there from Aerosmith, Slayer, Anthrax, Metallica. You had a ton of bands up there. Very well known and very successful musicians playing that show. And it's out of respect, folks. Even people that, you know, didn't like Ozzy, like maybe they didn't like him personally, they respected him and respected his legacy of the music that he helped create that shaped this entire genre of music itself. Now, obviously, Tony Iommi and Geezer Butler and Bill Ward, they all had a hand in that as well. But Ozzy was the front man of Black Sabbath and of that era that influenced pretty much everybody. You know, and the thing is, one of the things that, you know, to tell you how much Ozzy affected people. I mean, we all grew up with him. And when this all happened, when like we found out about this, people that I know in very well-known and successful heavy metal bands, some of whom are my friends, there was a lot of sadness. And I've had a few discussions and some email exchanges. I'm not going to go into the specifics and who they were. But all of these people are bummed out, are extremely sad, And a lot of them, it just kind of came out of nowhere. I think part of the reason people weren't expecting this is that the guy was just on stage July 5th and passed away less than a month after that. But this is a guy that who's part of a band that influenced so many musicians, both in the metal scene and outside of it. And he is probably, like, when you say heavy metal, he is one of the first names that pops up. Like, especially if someone that doesn't know the genre. Like, when you mention heavy metal to someone that's not into the genre, people will be like Metallica or Ozzy. Maybe they'll say AC/DC. But it's a very short list of bands people will mention that do not know anything about the heavy metal scene. And he is one of them. And he appealed to folks that normally don't, like I said, that normally don't listen to this music. It's a very sad day. And before I get into the end of this, to let you know how I got into Ozzy's music, I have a friend of mine. I was a kid. The first time I ever heard anything Ozzy Osbourne sang, he rode his bike up and bought this cassette tape at a local music store. We were in his driveway. We must have been, 12 years old, maybe. And to give you some context on that, my first Ozzy CD, the Randy Rhoads Tribute Live album, I bought in 1993 for $11.99. I was 15. So it's probably 4 years before that. And we had the compilation, We Sold Our Soul for Rock and Roll. We were playing it out of a boombox in the driveway playing basketball as kids. The first song I ever heard that he sang was War Pigs, which is still an incredible song to this day. I'm going to end the show off with this. I'll make this very short and very sweet. July 5th, 2025. Less than a month ago, Ozzy Osbourne sang his final show. Folks, they wheeled this guy out there. He was on his throne. He had been battling numerous health problems. He has Parkinson's. He had an assortment of physical ailments and probably 20 other things wrong with him that we didn't know about. He went out there and gave it 110% on the stage. Actually didn't sound too bad at all, to be honest. He sounded pretty good, especially considering his condition. The guy was in probably a lot of pain, a lot more than we know. He went out there, gave it all he had one last time. And that's how he went out. Folks, there's one word to describe somebody like that. Legend. That man went out doing what he loved to do, and he went out a legend. Folks, it's a very sad day. A very sad day for a lot of us when we found out Ozzy Osbourne passed away. I have probably listened to nothing but music from Black Sabbath during his era and his solo stuff. But this man created a legacy. He laid the foundation for this awesome music that we love. And he will definitely never be forgotten. With that said, again, I would love to hear your memories of getting into his music, whatever music he sang on. Your first album with Ozzy singing. Maybe tell me what your favorite album is and why. If you met him at any shows, I'd love to hear those stories. but we lost a legend. And there will never be another guy like him. There was never another guy like him before, and we will never see another Ozzy ever again. Definitely one of the most unique and iconic frontmen, not just in the history of heavy metal, but in the history of music, especially modern music. That's all I have for you, folks. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Stay metal.